You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim Jousma. Joining me as always, all the way in Portland, Maine, we have Here Holiness, the Reverend Tracy. How you doing?
I'm doing swell, Tim. Speaking of pronouns like here and thee and he, she, they, I just wanted to say happy Pride Month to you. It's a cool time. I like it. How colorful everything gets, like literally and figuratively, because everybody's got their pride flags out. That's cool because there's a lot of, I would think, assumptions made about Maine that perhaps it wouldn't be the most open to that. That has been absolutely not true. I don't know. It's a beautiful time of year and just in time for spring and everything and getting running and getting out there again. I'm getting the itch. I gotta dye my hair, right? Because that was kind of an early joke when I moved here, when somebody said, "Oh yeah, you can tell who the queer folk are because they've got crazy hair colors." And I'm like standing there with my teal, really short haircut, like, yep, okay.
Hi.
Hi-oh. Pansexual and, non-binary, gender fluid.
This ain't awkward. Hi.
Yep. And sometimes it's like 50-50 because, some people know what I mean when I say I'm pansexual and everybody else looks at me like, what's so sexy about cookware? Like, is it just stuff on the stovetop or do you like Tupperware too?
Well, you never know. I mean, that non-stick stuff, pretty hot.
Non-stick, yeah. So happy Pride Month, everybody out there. This is like the one month that I feel like I do talk about that a bit more. Because I know typically my personal stance is like, unless you're trying to date me, it's not super relevant. Like, you should want to be my friend or want to hire me or work with me, like based on how I am as a human or how I work, right? Like, so I'm a weird like mix of opinions on that one, right? Because I'm cool with saying who I am, just under context that makes sense to me. But Pride Month is one of those ones where I feel like that's a context to be proud about because it's also just normalizing it. And I do understand it. I appreciate the people out there who were comfortable from the get-go of putting pronouns in their signature lines. I know it was something that made me feel like, I don't know how I feel about somebody making me out myself, which I think we talked about. If you guys are looking for a good interview for Pride Month, we had done one where we talked to an old coworker of mine, Elias. And, maybe we can reference that. I don't know. Tim sometimes knows the episode numbers off the top of his head, but I do remember us kind of talking about, I was totally going to kill time. I saw you. But I was like, I got you. But yeah, we had totally had a conversation about how I remember feeling kind of like put in a position to out myself where I didn't really feel like it was relevant. Just for me, I separate those parts and that's my personal choice. And I do recall like him kind of having an interesting thought, like a reaction to that of kind of not considering it that way. So I guess I wanted to say, if you're one of those folks out there that, like me, is a little bit hesitant talking about it on the day-to-day or necessarily putting it on your signature lines, you're not alone. And I don't think we're that strange for wanting that separation. But happy Pride Month. And if this is a month that you feel comfortable talking about it, feel comfortable talking about it. Do you?
That's what she said. No, okay. That is episode 175, In Conversation with Elias Watts. So that was definitely a good episode. Definitely recommend y'all heading back into our archives and checking that out. And on my end, definitely happy Pride Month as well. For me here in Oregon, I've definitely noticed the weather changing as well. And this past week, I got to feed my crow friend again. I was so happy.
I saw that. Was it Cheez-Its? Is that what was out there?
Yes, and that was interesting too because again, we're the condo I'm at now is on a second floor and it has a little balcony on the upstairs. So I opened the door when I saw when I saw the crow out there, and then I put 2 Cheez-Its on the table on the deck. And the funny thing is, the moment the crow saw that, it was just like, oh shit, it's orange, it must be good, and flew down to the railing of the deck. And I'm in the door, and I'm like frozen for a moment, like, oh my god, he's here. And then I closed the door. I stood there for a minute, but the crow was still looking at me, so I had to walk out of the doorway and view the whole experience through the side window. But ultimately, the crow ended up getting both of those crackers, and hopefully had a nice little snack either for itself, whether it's a male or female, I don't know, of course, or if it was a female, if they use that to help feed some kids. It is that time of year, so who knows?
Yes, it is spring. The squirrels are out. Everything's singing. Oh man, it's a beautiful time of year. I love the spring. It's probably one of my favorites. But yeah, maybe I wonder if you leave them like a gift, like something shiny.
I tried. Like, the crow came back after the crackers. Like, I took a quarter out and then put it in the same spot, and then walked out, and the crow just sat there and looked at me. I was like, that ain't food, bitch.
Well, but put both is what I was saying. Like, maybe put a few crackers in some shiny things. Like, you can find some interesting shiny stuff.
Yeah, that I haven't done. But it was definitely cool. Just having the crow be comfortable enough to be on the railing while I was in the doorway. I mean, that, to me, that is huge. I mean, it's a wild creature, and yet it trusted me enough to know that I was going to be bumbling and wasn't going to be able to catch him, so he could be that close. But it was a cool experience, and I definitely had fun. But that, has been my big achievement for the week.
Oh, well, maybe at least you got a new porch pal out of it, right?
Hopefully, but speaking of big moments of the week, though, I know someone who was recently over in England playing with one Jeff Beck is a little bit happier, and that's one Mr. Johnny Depp.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. I mean, of course, in the very naturally Reverend way, I didn't super follow this. I do know that I have friends that followed it, like even since before in the prior case, right? Because this isn't the only case that has involved these two. Mm-hmm. Because to me, I first became aware of the whole Johnny Depp thing when the Animaniacs reboot came out, because they had him in the background, mm-hmm. but they had made the cartoon before that case happened. But people were pissed off that there was like a Johnny Depp, I think it was Crybaby, I forget. It was like just an old movie poster. Like, I think it was actually even talking about nostalgia, probably, because that was pretty much what that reboot was about. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like, that's what even made me aware that Johnny Depp had been canceled effectively at that point, right? Because that's before all of this stuff came out with this case.
Right. Yeah, and to be clear, I haven't followed the case too much myself, so this episode is not going to be like obviously a detailed blow-by-blow description of what happened in the case. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to libel in this country, it is kind of hard to win these types of cases. And so the fact that he was able to win, kind of tells me that he definitely was able to prove his point to the jury. There were some things that I didn't care for about the case. Like, I felt I don't feel having a case that involved domestic abuse type allegations should have been broadcast on national television, because in my opinion, this is not about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard at this point, but think about a woman who may be in Duluth, Minnesota, in the middle of a bad relationship, seeing all this and seeing all the stuff that, Amber Heard had to go through. And I'm not, and again, Amber lost whatever she can appeal and all that, but I think it does kind of. It was bad that they had the cameras on this whole experience, because I think in some ways this will make it to where women will probably not speak up as much. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it is kind of hard, right? Because I don't know these people. I've never been in their home. I only know what's kind of made it out there in our social media, which I don't necessarily trust its view of people because sometimes it's not close to fact. I guess when it comes down to it, there was a lot that I recalled kind of getting the vibe, because one of my best friends follows this case, my best friend Amy, and really the way it got described to me was that they were like a relationship made in hell. Like it seems like they both were really fucking toxic, and now that I can understand if that's what was going on, right? Because that can exist. You can actually both be, in a sense, abusive. Like, I'm not saying that's always the case, so please don't ever assume that that's the case. I'm just saying that it can happen. Mm-hmm. So statistically, with that being a reality, like something that can exist, it seems like that's what was going on in this situation, but you have to take that with a grain of that's what's now out because of social media and things like that, because I am not personally in their life. And so that's where it's like, I just don't really pay a lot of attention to these sorts of things. I hope it doesn't honestly have that kind of effect on people telling their story, because here's the thing. You're not costing somebody millions of dollars in a career that would even justify a case like this. You know what I mean? Like defamation, most people would probably never have a defamation case brought up against them if they're bringing up an abuse that happened, or, you know, may it be childhood abuse, like now that you're an adult, or domestic violence situation. But I guess there was enough compelling evidence that a lot of people seem to feel now that they both were shitty to each other, and that Amber Heard perhaps made things more like worse for Johnny than necessary by actions taken after that case had settled. Yeah. So that's where I understand that this was to be viewed from. And I did ask my best friend Amy if she would please, you know, explain it like I'm 5. Like, what was this case supposed to be? Because I didn't follow the shit before. It's okay. You don't have to explain the other one. Like, I get it. There was compelling evidence that he was abusive to her, right? That's it was an abuse case that was done there. And what happened here is, here's what she said. He sued her for defamation. She wrote an op-ed about being abused that didn't name him, but gave details that made it very obvious who she was talking about. The publication of that op-ed is what lost him Fantastic Beasts and Pirates and caused him difficulty getting big studio work. So that's why there's a $10 million price tag on this. Like, it wasn't so much that she came out and that she, you know, that she went up against him to say, like, I was being abused, right? Right. That's not the thing that she is, I don't want to say in trouble for, but that's not what she was found guilty of. I guess essentially because of how they decided that, you know, she was going to owe him, what was it? It was like $17 million, but some of it, like there was an offset kind of, right?
Yeah, it was 2 different things. You had compensatory damages of $10 million and then punitive damages of $5 million. However, in Virginia, punitive damages are capped off at $350,000, which it's a different story for a different day, is talking about stuff like cap limits and tort reform and all that, which is basically stuff that only benefits the ultra rich and big businesses. But that's ultimately what happened here. So ultimately, she is responsible for paying over $10 million to him, and the jury did find that there was one part where Johnny and his lawyer needed to pay some money to her. So ultimately, she's out about $8 million. Who knows what any sort of an appeal could potentially do to that. That could definitely lower it. That could even raise it. Who knows? I don't know. But
I mean, the only thing I know is that I think what the judges, any judges involved at this point, failed to do was like maybe get these people into some form of therapy, because I think it's at least a good argument. The things that came out in both cases that would lean towards these are people that were really in a super toxic situation. And these are things that happen, right? Like this happens every day on the smaller scale. Because, I mean, there's probably a good number of cases out there that you could find. Person A is coming home from work and brings a 6-pack of beer because they've been fighting with person B who is already at home. They drink and have an argument, you know what I mean? And if there are times where it gets physical on both sides. Both people have bruises, right?
Like, it can happen. Yeah.
It can happen, but and that's not even like the most common thing. And I hope nobody ever hears that I am like saying, oh, well, when somebody says they're being abused, they clearly were just in a toxic relationship. I mean, that could be true, but that does exist a lot without both people necessarily like being toxic. I'm just saying it seems like there was enough evidence out there that it seems to be maybe this was the equivalent possibly of more of a drunken fight situation. And I'm not saying because I didn't follow that case about the actual abuse case. So I don't want to even claim to say that they ruled that incorrectly. Mm-hmm. They had their evidence. They ruled with what they had. I don't know how the system works because that was in the UK. But yeah, it's definitely a tricky situation. But I really genuinely with all of my heart hope that people don't feel like they can't turn in abuse when it's happening, because by all means you should. But there also does deserve to be that when the courts get involved and there's two people, that it kind of seems like they both were contributing. Like there is proof to say they both were contributing. Like, is that not also maybe something they should intervene on? Because if you've got both of them, like, wouldn't they also be likely to go and then do that to another person? Like, and I guess as long, like, you can't necessarily charge for that, right? But it kind of stinks that we had this whole public viewing of that scenario, it seems, right? Because that seems to be what people took away from this at the end of both cases, was that it seems like they both were really shitty to each other. But yet, we know this, but we have no idea if anything is going to actually address that issue that resulted in both cases ever even happening. So it's just the interesting thing. People want there to be a financial thing about stuff, and yeah, I guess they got their money, and that's our form of justice here. But to me, it's almost frustrating, this conversation and this topic, because I don't feel like anything actually got resolved.
Yeah. And I think too, like one thing you're not saying about, couples, toxic couples is that, you're not saying two wrongs make a right here, of course.
No.
When people do bad things, they should be punished for those bad things if those bad things happen, but yeah. Again, we're also talking about, like maybe not so much on the Amber Johnny side of things, but a regular, 9 to 5 Joe 6-pack, like the scenario you talked about. If person B is the one who calls the cops first, guess who's going to get listened to most of the time? The cops aren't necessarily going to take the time to investigate and see the entire nuance of the situation.
Yes, I have had friends talk to me about drunken fist fights they have gotten into with their partners. Some of their partners have also been female, but some of their partners have also been male. So, yeah, it can happen. It's just frustrating to me because, really honestly, in all of those cases, I do kind of wish that somehow we could have people go to counseling, right? Because it honestly kind of stinks that we try to equate resolution with some kind of financial dollar amount, because that's really kind of screwing people over, like, no matter what, right? Because even when we do have somebody who is legitimately a victim of someone who has been very abusive to them, there's no guarantee that they will ever actually get help for that. And now that does also feed into, we don't have the easiest access to healthcare. We talked about that recently. But even if we did have access to that healthcare, there would be nothing making them do it. So Unfortunately, what you kind of end up with is a bunch of victims out there too who also could use the benefits of therapy, because I don't ever say anymore I mean, I can't tell you when this started for me for sure. I don't say anymore, you need therapy, in a way to be like saying, I think you're a bad person. No, not at all. When I say like somebody needs therapy, I'm saying it really seems like that person needs some help. And what sucks about like the invisible illnesses that also can manifest in things like violent fighting are the same ones that you struggle to go get help for, because you do get in your own way in that sense. I mean, so I don't know. It's when these topics come up, it's just interesting for me, because I just feel like we don't have a system that helps. I feel like we have a system that tries to figure out how much money will make you feel okay that this happens, versus what actions can we take so these people don't get involved in these situations again. Or know what I mean? It goes back to, I have more of a belief in restorative justice than the necessarily like therapy and healing shouldn't be a punishment, but I get making it required if you fucked up hard enough.
Yeah, I mean, in this particular case, I mean, like libel, I believe, is more like a civil type of charge anyway. So I don't think, a judge would even be able to say you must go to therapy or something like that.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm not even saying that they necessarily should, right? Because I don't know. There's no good answer for it. It just stinks when it feels like that once again we've had this very public parade of, well, those are some really broken people that could maybe use some professional help being unbroken, rather than making them feel like they have fixed something through the pageantry of our public court. Which, anyway, I know we didn't want to like necessarily hang on this for too long. It's just been interesting because it's been in the background for so long that, is it resolved, or is there going to be like another thing in a few months? I hope not. I don't know. I want to hear stories that they went to therapy. That's what I want to hear, that they're healed people and not doing this to anybody or themselves anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was going to do the segue right here, and it's a great way to do it. I mean, this is not the first time in history a case like this has happened. This is not the last time in history this will ever happen again. This kind of ties in with a theme that we've talked about on the show before, cancel culture, because there was a lot of online talk about this particular trial that was disturbing in a lot of ways. You had people, ultimately treating this like a sporting event, like if Johnny wins, somehow they win a prize or something like that, and they're not taking the time to, actually get to the bottom of the case and, and actually dig into the nuances, because a lot of the times with these arguments, you have people, they're just arguing on like a black and white type of argument, which doesn't really exist with especially stuff like this. It's complicated. You can't say Johnny Depp is some sort of a hero and the greatest person alive when it is proven that he did do some bad stuff. Guess what? Good people can fuck up.
Oh, yes, indeed. And I know, at least in some states in America, you can't always countersue, right? It's sometimes it's whoever makes the claim first. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's the case in the UK, but I don't know if it was ever possible for Johnny to also say, well, we actually did some shit to each other. Because it goes back to, that's what seems to have really come out in the American case, was that, there anyway. But there has been like a lot of cancel culture stuff. And I know you and I have talked about it a bit, and it's frustrating, right? Like, there's certain people at this point that I'm just like, oh my God, please don't get canceled, because I would literally be heartbroken. Like Patton Oswalt is one that at this point, like if anything came out about Patton, I would just be absolutely gutted. I mean, I loved Louis C.K. before. He's one of the few that I saw that I went out of my way to see in public. Tim, and I know I mentioned on the show, like, I don't do crowds. I don't like big crowds. Call it a symptom of my CPTSD. I don't like a lot of humans close into me, like, anymore. Like, especially, like, it's just something that I don't do. So I went out of my way to go see him. And then what was funny was when that came out, I guess in a weird way, it didn't surprise me as much as like it has with other people, right? Like Bill Cosby shocked the shit out of me, right? But Louis, like, if I've got to be honest, I'm like, I could totally see you being the type to take your dick out like that one.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody has seen any of his show, Louis, that was on FX, I mean, this looks like this is a scene that could have easily have been on that show multiple times.
Yeah, and he even has like a bit about his dick looking like a chapped pigtail, like chapped pig's ass or something like that. Like,
yeah,
which is that humiliation, right? That shame thing that, you know, just talking on the weird side nerd of psychological side of it, is, you know, flashers, right? It's really about like the shame thing.
The power of the shame, they're trying to control it. And you know, to be clear, we're not, condoning his behavior.
God.
The behavior he did was reprehensible in a pretty big way, especially when it came to some of the lesser known female comics and how his management kind of stifled some of their careers. So, you know, but that's the thing with cancel culture here. It's that people will take a situation like this and then take like a bad thing that a person's done, a legitimate bad thing in this particular case, and yet say that one thing that they did, that one horrible thing, represents everything about them as a human being. And we know in theory that is not the case, because I mean, the question I would throw to anybody is like, imagine the worst thing you've ever done and imagine that showing up on the news. How would you react? You know?
Oh yeah. I mean, and granted, these are big scale people, right? So I just have a hard time with the public court thing, which is really what gets us into the cancel culture thing. Because cancel culture isn't that a judge out there said, you're not doing movies anymore. We're removing your voice and credit from the end of the show, which is what they did to Louis C.K. in the final episodes of Gravity Falls after all that came out. Like, that's not happening because of the court's decision. That's happening largely because of public opinion. And the public court and things like that, which was something I did recall seeing that first caught my attention about the fact that this case was happening, was a little article had come across at one point saying that Johnny Depp was regaining favor in the eyes of the public court. So kind of canceling cancel culture on himself. Like, right? It seems like his cancellation has been canceled because of the stuff that came out, which I guess is the most fascinating part about this case, is you don't see it a lot where somebody gets uncanceled.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of what we wanted to talk about here. I mean, cancel culture is the term is being thrown out a lot, and I think people aren't taking the time to look at the pros and cons. There are definite positives that have come from this whole concept of cancel culture, utilizing social media to call out bad behavior. But on the flip side, there have also been times to where it has been used for nefarious purposes. So this week, go ahead.
Oh, no, just a funny thing I want to mention, because I know not everybody likes Ricky Gervais, but in his most recent special, I did think that he said something that is relevant to this, because my problem isn't necessarily, like, I wonder, losing the job contracts and stuff because of being found guilty of something, right? And that was their decision. I guess I get that, right? Because at least you were found guilty of something. But, talking about some of the things that we choose to cancel over too, it's not always serious stuff like this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes it is a joke made decades ago that if you were to travel back in time in the decades, that is what would have been entertaining in a funny way to address a topic, which comedians, being kind of those court jester people, that's mostly what they're doing, is trying to find a way to be funny and maybe even deflect with humor on some of these hard things. But one of the things that Ricky Gervais had said that I found with him covering some of the stuff with cancel culture is, and I found the quote so I wouldn't misquote it really quick, "You can't predict what will be offensive in the future. You don't know who the dominant mob will be," right? And granted, the joke that he wound up making was making the statement that women don't have penises is like the most offensive thing that you can say right now.
Mm-hmm.
And what he was trying to say is if you went back in time, saying that at some point would be like okay, like, you know, like it just would have been some sentence. But sometimes like those things get brought out later was kind of some of that. And I'm not going to say that that's always the case, because some people, there are some things like, okay, but they also have some very clearly biggity and shitty behavior that, maybe don't buy that person's album. But, you know, it's taking into context of what was that person actually trying to convey and communicate at the time that it was made. Because of the internet, we have this ability to hang on to things for forever. And you're going to always read them in the context of now, not the context of then. So that also is a thing with cancel culture. And that's probably been some of my more, I feel frustrated and conflicted about it when people cancel for reasons like that. For especially comedians making a joke, somebody playing a certain part, etc. Because you're not taking into context being back in the time when that content was created.
Indeed. And there's a lot that we'll get into here with this. This week, I channeled my inner Reverend, and we came up with some pros and cons on this particular issue. Got it from the procon.org website that the Reverend the Reverend introduced me to. So again, when I say I'm channeling my inner Reverend, I'm doing that for real today. But again, the purpose of this is to kind of disseminate this whole idea of what it potentially is and talk about some of the good and some of the bad here, because there is bad. Now, we'll start out with the pro. The first pro is call out culture allows marginalized people to seek accountability where the justice system fails. And that, I mean, there are plenty of instances where that happened. You know, think about all the Me Too movement that got Harvey Weinstein in jail. That is a very, very positive outcome of cancel culture. Bill Cosby is another person that, thanks to social media, it started off with a comedian, you know, just saying, they had enough about Bill Cosby, and then talking about the rumors, and then thanks to social media spreading that clip everywhere, that started the snowball that ultimately took down Bill Cosby. And you know, social media, cancel culture can lead to positive things. And another thing too, think about a couple of years ago with the Black Lives Matter. It was social media that helped alert the public to what happened to George Floyd, and that helped bring about some significant change here. So in a lot of ways, it can work, and work really, really well to take down people that really deserve to be taken down.
Exactly. And that is definitely something that I have zero problem with. And that's telling your story, right? And getting people like, hey, you're not alone. Thus the hashtag Me Too. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's definitely an interesting pro because that's. Yeah, I can't think of anything that really it speaks for itself, because mm-hmm. it does take sometimes feeling not alone to feel comfortable coming out. And I am definitely not one to say that women make up these things in hopes that other women will also be willing to make up the same thing. Like, hell no. As somebody who has, tried to look into what the process looks like to turn somebody in, it's really intimidating. Because you do have to kind of weigh if it's going to have any real personal damaging effects, and you kind of end up teeter-tottering on, is it going to hurt me more to talk about this than it would if I you know what I mean? Like, is it, yeah. It's a really shitty battle to have to deal with. I can speak from that one from experience, that it kind of sucks to have to weigh out, do I turn in this abuser at the cost of all of this potential bad stuff? Or do I not turn in this abuser and just continue working on my own healing and try to move past it on my own? Now, if they're still in a position to abuse, which obviously, right, with like these guys that were kind of still doing this black casting couch kind of mentality of shit and really taking advantage of those situations. Oh, does that situation really need to be like social media'd? Yes. Right? Because those are big names. That's a lot of potential victims.
Yeah.
However, it's like me going on and putting the person that I'm talking about on blast probably won't help. Mostly because like, right, like the person that I would deal with would have a much smaller window. So, I mean, it doesn't benefit necessarily everybody doing the exact same action that those women did, right? But it was in a way of saying, I can't be the only one. If he was this aggressive with me, this very huge, well-known person, there has to be others out there. And so, but I don't know if that necessarily is the same thing as cancel culture in my head, right? Like the whole Me Too, the reaching out and using the internet to talk to people, because that wasn't necessarily them saying you can't hire these people anymore. That was them saying, hey, this happened to me. Did this happen to anybody else?
But the Harvey Weinstein thing was a little different. I mean, the accusations became, open and became known to the public because of the Me Too movement, with people speaking out. And then the thing I was going to mention with Cosby, too, is that the benefit of the people speaking out is not that these people all get together and share their stories. It's that when one person does speak out and the other people are comfortable to speak out for a situation as serious as the Harvey Weinstein or as a Bill Cosby, and law enforcement gets involved, law enforcement is going to have some information that the general public does not. And if all of these people are saying the same story and confirming stuff that they already know, guess what? You're going to end up with a Harvey Weinstein jail situation, or Bill Cosby, dealing with his legal issues. So there, in terms of the cancel culture, like the Me Too, was it termed cancel culture? No, it wasn't. But it was still using a lot of the same, because again, cancel culture is nebulous. It's not like one specific action that you do. It's just a label that people give for different types of activism.
Got you. So Me Too isn't like, it didn't cause cancel culture, but now it's kind of umbrellaed under it as being related to it.
Exactly.
And gotcha. See, and I never really considered that as necessarily being related to it. So I think that's really interesting to learn through this conversation, because to me, the Me Too movement was more, being able to tell your story and being open about the fact that you tell. I mean, I am a hashtag Me Tooer. That's why, just in this conversation, just very conversationally, you guys know that I'm considering turning something in at some point, and that I'm trying to debate that. And I think that, to me, is more some of the Me Too stuff, is encouraging by saying, like, yes, I am doing this. Me too. Mm-hmm. I'm healing from this. Me too. Like, there's more than just I'm turning it in. It's also I'm healing from it. I'm going through this too. Like, we're not alone, and that this is enough of an issue that we should definitely be fucking talking about it. But I can see where that's related, especially when you put it on somebody famous. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's... Yeah.
Well, it boils down to power, too. I mean, like what you said about your own personal example. Yeah, doing the method that took Harvey Weinstein down is probably not going to work, because the person in question doesn't have the power that Weinstein did. So you would have to go through other tacks. But, that is what it is, I guess. But I
did want to, sorry, just like, again, like if people are taking like the stuff that just happened with Amber Heard, though, it just hit me like, there are so many people who have written stories about their abuse, like people that you guys don't know because they're not big names, but I don't see any of them being sued for defamation, even though if they're using their real name, anybody from their immediate circle would know exactly who they're talking about. So I don't know, like, it's just kind of... with defamation now, I mean, like, think about it on Johnny, and the fact that he won means I guess he had some legitimacy here. Like, if someone did say something about you and it ended up costing you money as a person, and you had the ability to take them to court, wouldn't you? I mean, I certainly would. Now, having said that, in my tax bracket, I'm probably not gonna ever encounter that situation. But if you are making, potentially, if you are losing out on a $20 million film deal over something that's not true,
or maybe has the reality of it is not what the spin is out there, then maybe you have a right to fight it,
Yeah, but any two.
Anyway, but with any pro, there is a con. So the first con here is call out culture amounts to online bullying and can incite violence and threats even worse than the original offense being called out. And one of the examples that they brought up was the case of one Justine Sacco. She, a few years back, was in London, and she was preparing to travel to, I believe, South Africa. And before she got on the plane, she tweeted out something along the lines of, "I'm going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Whoops, I'm white, not going to happen." Something along those lines. And a journalist by the name of Sam Biddle, for some reason or another, came across this tweet and retweeted it. And what happened is that the whole world, while this woman was on this plane, became aware of the situation, and she ended up losing her job by the time her plane landed down. And you even had people that were able to find the airport she was in and like take pictures of her when she's just realizing the shit that her stupid tweet said. And like, yeah, now to be 100% clear, I am not defending a tweet. A stupid tweet is a stupid tweet.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of people who make really poor taste jokes. Like, that definitely falls outside of the, you got to go back to when it was written. It doesn't sound like it was funny when it was written either. Like, it sounds like it was pretty bad, but does somebody deserve to possibly end up in a homeless demographic because of a tweet? Not standing up for that joke. That was horrible, and not even a joke. That was just a very offensive thing to say. I agree with the quotes around the word joke with that tweet, but I just don't think it deserves somebody not being able to work. It kind of makes me go, where's that person's defamation case against Sam Biddle? Like, if they got fired from their job, like, they would have lost income even if they were able to find something again right away.
Yeah. And that's the thing here too. Like I brought up on the show before the time when Star Wars Episode 7 came out, and there was an article of a little kid who got to see the movie early because he had a terminal disease, and I made the joke online like, "Oh, I wish I had a terminal disease."
Oh yeah. See, imagine if a journalist had gotten that, you might have been fired from Apple.
They would have done me a favor.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, they would have done me a favor if they did that. But that's the thing, though. The problem is, I don't know this Justine Sacco. From all accounts that I have read on her, it sounds like this is just something that she knew was stupid. But sometimes in your friend group, you say stupid things. It's just when it is on social media and it is written out and you don't know that person, how are you supposed to know, Oh,
exactly. I'm sorry. I've been in a lot of friend groups like throughout my life. And the one thing they've all had in common? They tell the most disgustingly horrible jokes when they know it is just that friend group. And that friend group is often, mixed race, mixed gender. But the thing that we get is that we know that them making that joke isn't them saying that opinion is okay. That is them totally making fun of the fact that somebody believes that, right? Like that's even, again, it goes back to, I kind of love the cancel culture stuff that he went into on his most recent special is, like taking into consideration, like knowing the person and knowing what they're going for, because something that Ricky Gervais did address is that he will do what he needs to do to make something funny because that is his job. And if that means making you believe that he really believes something to sell that joke, which is often what you need to do if you're selling a joke like that, then he's going to do it because that's his job. And then I thought it was great. He did take a second. He's like, you want me to get real with you? Fine, I'll be real with you. and he had like a little bit of a platform. It's funny because I know you and I have talked about that, and I know right now there's a little bit of buzz because this is a new special. And yes, there have been some things pulled from it that are offensive. But I also watched the entire special where I don't feel like a lot of people are reacting to the entire special, and they're pulling quotes made from it. So I guess that's why he's naturally coming up today, and me having seen that recently, because it's almost like we have another thing that might play out in the background. Granted, he has a lot of money and it's not going to hurt him to be canceled. Like, I think he's totally fine with it because he could just live the rest of his life in a bunker and totally that would be his dream. He is a little bit of a recluse, but, like in that sense. But yeah, like there's some stuff about that that's really relevant, right? But that is the thing that did kind of make me chuckle to think of. That's the one thing I found in common with all of my friend groups, is that when you are around each other, and the thing is that we've got the knowledge that we're not terrible people. We know we're not. So we know the intention behind that joke is not really making fun of the context of the joke. It's making fun of the person who would actually believe that. So,
yeah.
And granted, that doesn't even sound like her tweet fell under that, but she was just a nobody. She was probably making a joke to what in her mind was her friend group, because who the fuck follows me?
Yeah, she was someone that had like less than 100 people on Twitter. I mean, like just an average person on Twitter that normally screams into the wind. Like our show account, for instance, has over 3,000 people that follow us. Yet I still feel like I'm screaming into the wind every time I do anything on Twitter, because like it seems like nobody's there. But how these algorithms are ultimately made is it's based on outrage, you know, and it was just, you know, people do tend to get excited about this outrage. There's a great special on HBO Max called 15 Minutes of Shame, you know, that talked about some of the history of, you know, out of like cancel culture type stuff, and like how even in like the 1300s with stuff like the pillory, you know, the stocks, you know, where people had to be out in public, that is very much in line with what we're doing today, just an older, less technological method. You know, we've always had it in ourselves to be this evil to people. It's just now a lot of times online, I mean, we're making these assumptions about people online that we don't know based on words. And yet a lot of time with language, you know, there's more to language than just words. Yeah. There's inflection of voice, there's body language. You know, if you're being sarcastic, you know, like I was with the Star Wars thing, if people had heard me say, "Oh, I wish I had a terminal disease," doesn't make what I said a good joke, but they would get that I was being silly, you know. And what Sako said, there's no way you can, you know, work around. I'm not saying that, but
I mean, can you? Because you're not friends with that person. Right. I don't know. Maybe put their friends on a bench and be like, "What did you think they meant by this?" And then they'd be like, "Wait, what?" Because they probably didn't even see the damn tweet, you know?
Yeah.
But that is definitely a little out there, given that this person was just a nobody person who just made what sounds like a really stupid joke that, yeah, I can't imagine a lot of good, like where that joke would have been good, right? Like it just felt like kind of a shitty racist thing to hear, but that still goes into, I don't know this person. This person could potentially be a saint that is like constantly working with the houseless demographic, and a lot of that demographic being people of color. You know, they could have a very compassionate soul, or they could have been like on their way to go help with something and trying to be very sarcastic, which if friends knew that they were, I mean, I'm not saying this is fact, by the way, so seriously prefacing. I'm just saying we don't know, but a lot of people judged without any of that knowledge either.
That's the problem.
Because who's to say she wasn't like, because she could be making fun of the people who actually believe that shit. Meanwhile, she's on her way, or he, this was actually a dude, I think. She. Sorry. Yep. So she's like, if the reality was that she was hopping on a plane to go and volunteer and help these people who are sick and dying from this, and was making that joke, like I said, with that intent of not making a joke about that reality, but making a joke about the expense of the humans who actually believe that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, God, wouldn't everybody kind of feel a little bit like assholes? But that's not how it seemed that played out. Instead, it goes into the public just judged, having no knowledge of anything about this person, other than a tweet they shared.
Yep. And she ended up losing her job. She had death threats.
Which not excusable. I'm sorry. Yeah. That's horrible.
For a tweet, but let's move on to the next pro here, because we're going to dive a little deeper into this. But the next pro here is that call out culture gives a voice to disenfranchised or less powerful people. And there was a quote here I wanted to read. I don't want to say her name because I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, but I will put it in the show description. The quote is, "The critics of cancel culture are plainly threatened not by a new and uniquely powerful kind of public criticism, but by a new set of critics, young progressives, including many minorities and women who, largely through social media, have obtained a seat at the table where matters of justice and etiquette are debated and are banging it loudly to make up for lost time." And that's the quote there. And I put in my notes, think about how groups like Black Lives Matter were able to utilize social media to call out the injustices that the government was not solving. Think of Greta Thunberg, the environmental activist. She was only 16 when she started, but thanks to social media, was able to get a lot of eyes on the global warming situation that may not have necessarily have been there without her work. So in terms of how activism online can be used in positive ways for especially disenfranchised and marginalized people, I mean, the evidence is out there. It really works successfully, and I don't see that as a bad thing.
Right. I mean, and people should definitely have a voice, and I enjoy all of that, right? And I even kind of understand, in a way, choosing not to, watch something if you don't, like, because that's the only power they really have, right? Like the person at home who doesn't want to support this person making movies or whatever. Here's a story, right? They're allowed to make that decision to not pay money to go and enjoy any of the entertainment that person does. However, I get into this weird thing, right? Because to me, when they start demanding, you need to fire so-and-so because, right? Like to take your own action, like the thing that you can control is what you do, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I understand choosing to not go see the movie, and even like putting out there, like, I'm not going to see this movie because da-da-da. But I guess what gets me is when they threaten to never watch like anything a producer does again if you don't fire them. Like, people are kind of worried about almost secondhand cancellation, if that makes sense. Like that if you don't get rid of somebody because of the public, that everything you do will start being, picketed by a group of people, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of some of the argument in the con here, and that's call out culture is not productive and does not bring about social change. Like one quote here from Patrice Kahn Cullors, who's a co-founder of Black Lives Matter: "People don't understand that social activist organizing isn't going online and cussing people out or going to a protest and calling something out." And think of the celebrities out there that have had, canceling, quote unquote, like your Louis C.K.'s, Mel Gibson, Woody Allen, Ted Nugent, Michael Jackson, among many others. Last I checked, all those people I mentioned still have careers, it's like, at what point does this activism become just virtue signaling, more patting yourself on the back that I'm a good human being because I'm against this particular thing? Like Ted Nugent is an interesting case here, because in the 70s, he's making songs like, Cat Scratch Fever, Wang Dang, Sweet Poontang, just nothing, it's simple, basic rock. It's not rocket scientists here. But now people are, don't want to listen to his music or put his music into stuff because, or publicly say, I don't listen to his music, he's bad, because of his political opinions. Like, one, like, he has a right to his political opinions, and two, like I mentioned earlier, me as a person, like, I don't agree with him politically, but me listening to one of his songs on Apple Music, he's getting 1/10 of 1 cent maybe off of that. Like, how is that helping a political cause. And let's say again that I buy a CD of his. Like, how is that really a bad thing? You know, it's like, at what point are we going to say, you know, as a culture, you know, we need to go after the people that kind of deserve it, you know, because sometimes like the Ted Nugent's just guilty for giving an opinion. Rather, you know, not beautifully, bluntly, badly. He's wrong, but in my opinion, but he has a right to say it, you know?
Oh, yeah. Like, that is one of the things that I don't necessarily agree with canceling somebody over, is when they've expressed an opinion. Because you can have opinions. You can. And you can then choose, if you want to no longer watch that person, whatever, that's fine. I definitely think one of the signs of virtue signaling, though, is that whole, like, when they campaign about it and try to convince you why you really should never listen to this person again. Yeah. When it's like, but me, I don't condone necessarily what Louis C.K. did, but I do own a copy of The Gravity Falls with his voice in it. But, you know, I don't necessarily agree with undoing the work that somebody's done, which is what some of this turns into sometimes. But some of us, it goes back to, there are some of us who separate the art from the artist in that sense. Now, if it had been something so egregious and bad, like, I don't know, I'm probably not going to be able to even enjoy anything with Bill Cosby in it, honestly, because to me, that is beyond, like, I can't watch you pretend to be a good dad. But yeah, I have very mixed feelings when people try to tell me that I shouldn't do anything anymore because of their belief. And I think that's when it gets into that almost virtue signaling side of it.
And there's another thing with the virtue signaling that I don't like, that, you know, the big example would be Cosby, where you have people now stating that, you know, I don't like Cosby and I never did. He never did anything positive, when that is not the case. You know, I mean, the Cosby Show was a big deal in the 80s for a reason. You know, does that mean, do I think, you know, a TV network should bring it back? Of course not. And again, we've talked about nostalgia before in the past. We can recognize the power of what something did without having to bring it up again. Like, he did do some good. We can still acknowledge history for what it was, factual history, while still, you know, stating he's a bad guy without watching his stuff now. Yeah. So, and I'm the same way with Cosby. Like, it's like hearing everything I've heard about him is just, you feel betrayed more than anything.
Yeah, but you're not gaslighting yourself into believing that you never liked any of his stuff, though, that somehow you always knew that he was bad. See, we actually do this in our culture all the time. Look at when people break up. Especially when you've got that friend that's in your ear also saying, I knew they were always bad, right? Because that is almost them, maybe not by intention, convincing you that there were signs that they were always bad. Well, you can repeat a lie to yourself over and over. They've done studies on habitual liars, and eventually those lies become truth. So yes, I could see if it got into their head to decide, well, I must have never liked him because there were always signs that he was creepy, that then you convince yourself, and that then does become your reality.
But that's the thing. Doesn't
make it true, but it makes it your reality.
Yeah, I mean, think about that clip from one of the early seasons of The Cosby Show where Cliff Huxtable is they're outside in a family barbecue, and everybody's everybody's with their partners and snuggling, and Cliff Huxtable's telling his wife about the barbecue sauce and how that makes people quiet. And with everything we know now about how Cosby drugged people, how that character was describing it was creepy as fuck. But that's what hindsight brought into that. You know, it's like how it was delivered at the time. People didn't know that and just thought that, you know, he was talking about his food, you know, which the character was. Let's be honest here. That particular scene, that character was. I mean, Cliff Huxtable is not Bill Cosby. He's a fictional character.
He's a fictional character that Bill Cosby portrayed. But but nobody told me that I shouldn't like Bill Cosby. That came naturally to me. It just doesn't happen every time something like this happens. However, with the con, that call out culture, because I do think it's interesting, by the way, that they're saying call out culture instead of cancel culture. But I think this is actually another one of those things I'm going to learn is just umbrellaed under this, right? It's related to it, but it's kind of different-y. It's samey, but different-y. Because call out culture, even like in that sense of hashtag Me Too, was kind of a call out culture, right? Especially the ones who did use the Me Too movement to help bring attention to well-known famous people. And that was how they then found like more people who were victims and makes a case. That definitely, I would say, is a good thing about call out culture. All for that. So I almost kind of directly disagree with the con here. I do think it does make change because it's helping at least show that enough people agree that that behavior is not acceptable. So it's at least helping in the sense to denormalize things. Because, oh my gosh, if you want to think about how much stuff has changed, go watch a little movie called 9 to 5 with one Dolly Parton. Because if you notice, like, that was kind of normally made fun of in movies back then, and not for nothing, but because, like, that level of sexism was kind of rampant and out there. So the more that we call out as the public, the call out cultureness of it, I'm fine with that because that does actually give a voice that, you know, when you're saying this person did this, that is kind of like the only power that you can have in that situation, I guess. And maybe it should be known that people who are looking up to this person as like a role model, that maybe they're not a role model. Like, I guess once you're so famous, I understand call out culture. And I do kind of think that people verbalizing that certain things aren't acceptable, or at least making it a lot less acceptable for people to justify doing, right? So I don't know. I don't know if I can get behind this con saying so factually that call out culture is not productive and does not bring about social change. Because look at George Floyd.
Yep.
There have been changes since all of that, whether you're very distracted by the pandemic or not. There has been a larger conversation that's going on that's good. Now, is it fixed? Oh, fuck no. Like we have a lot of way to go, and we have like a whole party that wants to heel dig and say there's no problems here. But there is still a lot of conversation, and I would like to hope that that conversation is going to affect who people vote for, because that's the language this country speaks. So now that, you know, we know kind of all of this anti-abortion stuff going on, people talking about the fact that other states are doing this and talking about that they don't agree with it is actually going to, I would assume, spread awareness and make a lot more people who care passionately about that come out and vote. So I just don't buy that it doesn't affect any social change. Like, does that make sense? Like, I'm kind of not buying the con here.
Yeah, I don't buy it either. Now, but I think what needs to be focused on here is that people need to be more discerning, I guess, in terms of who they go after. You know, like let's bring up Mel Gibson. You know, Mel Gibson has said a lot of bad things. You know, but he said a lot of bad things. Now, to your point, if those bad things that he said, if that's something that's a deal breaker for you and you don't want to watch his movies anymore, great. That's fine. That's not a problem. I'm not going to tell anybody to keep watching his movies if you're uncomfortable with it. But the discerning part is recognizing that, you know, just because you don't necessarily like him now doesn't mean he hasn't had an impact as an actor over time. And, you know, publicly patting yourself on the back for not watching somebody, it's what was that thing about? Yeah, you're not going to get a Nobel Prize for not watching a new Lethal Weapon film if it comes out, you know. You got to know where to use your power in this. And 99% of the people that are hopping on social media going along with these hashtags and just doing it there, they're not really supporting they're not really supporting the effort they claim they are. They're just looking to get people to say you're a good person.
I think it's funny because I think the only time, I don't know, I might be accidentally confessing that maybe I'm not a good person, but like, I think the only time I've ever announced I will not be watching this was Ready Player One. And it was because I hated his casting decision for one of my favorite female protagonists. Like, but I mean, that being said, the ones that I think of, like Kanye West is another one, by the way, I would say right? Didn't he totally hit? Like, wasn't he abusive?
No,
or is that just like some weird internet thing?
I know, from what I know, apparently he is dealing with some mental health issues, that being a world famous rich rock star, he's not necessarily getting the help he needs because he doesn't have people that can tell him no. And I mean, I've not heard anything about violence or anything like that, but he also is making videos talking about killing Pete Davidson for dating his ex-wife. So hey.
Oh God, poor Pete Davidson. He hits me off as somebody who's actually really awkward in real life. Like, just by the way, because a lot of comedians seem to be just because they're on TV doesn't mean they're smooth operators in the day to day. A lot of comedians are crazy fucking awkward. But yeah, I mean, now that being said, I did not pay to see Louis C.K.'s the album that he won a Grammy for when he uncanceled himself, but I guess there's still backlash going in the background with the drama of that. But I did see that I learned that he won a Grammy for the thing that I chose not to give money to. But I guess that goes into I didn't want to signal, I don't make your own decisions. I don't want people to make decisions just because that's my decision. I didn't need to tell people that Louis C.K. was up to some shit, right? It wasn't not new news to anybody. So why? That's, I guess, what gets me is when maybe it's a little bit more of a sign of virtue signaling too, when it's common knowledge. Right?
Yeah.
I don't think you need to tell people that if Bill Cosby decided to do a local stand-up in your area, I don't think you need to tell people at that point what he did and maybe why they shouldn't give him their money. I guess it's different to inform people of the type of person somebody is rather than when you say you shouldn't do this because I feel a certain way about it.
And that's kind of where we're at with people like Louis C.K. I mean, again, I think he's been very open about the fact that, I fucked up. Shouldn't have done what I did. And I can understand, some people being that's still it for me. That's fine. But, I think we're at the point with him to where, you're going to have your people that are going to publicly hate him no matter what. And you're going to have your people that are still going to support him no matter what. There's no real nuance here. There's no trying to dive deep and try to understand him as a human being.
Yeah.
And he's also in a unique situation too, because he is popular enough that he can, rent any hall that he wants in the country. It's his problem. He doesn't necessarily have to involve other comedians with his work, even though I still think he does some shows at regular comedy clubs still and whatnot. But still, people deserve to suffer the repercussions of their bad behavior, but not forever.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting mentality that we're slightly different on, because I don't really necessarily think people should have to necessarily suffer or be punished, but I really would like to see them do things to not be that anymore, right? And it's we don't know what Louis C.K. has done with this time, or if that was something that he did more in heavier drinking times, because it goes back to, if you followed this man's career and his comedy, he's kind of dark, right? And that's not necessarily going to come from a place of just sitting down and making up darkness. A lot of comedians make jokes largely from personal experience. So would I be totally surprised if this was during a darker time, and if maybe since then there had been healing? And that's where I don't believe people should be canceled forever. Mm-hmm. Right? Because when it comes down to it, there are levels, right? Bill Cosby drugging people and doing things is so obviously on a different level than somebody making a joke or a comment on Twitter, or a joke or a comment that's pulled out of a comedy special with none of the other context around the joke. Yeah, it's just But it almost seems like cancel culture to me is when you take those things and make them equal and attack them with like equal aggressiveness of like, this person should never work again because they made this joke. And then sometimes it's even been, and I forget because it goes back to when he was doing his whole bit about cancel culture in Ricky's most recent Netflix. He had said a specific situation, and I don't remember the actor's name, but they had made some joke about their son about, oh my gosh, I hope he doesn't turn out gay.
Kevin Hart, I think.
Okay, good. Maybe it was Kevin. That sounds familiar. So yeah, and then they asked him, so he did apologize. And then years later, somebody dug it back up and like tried to demand that he apologize again. And I guess he said no. He's like, I'm not going to keep apologizing for, because you know what I mean? Like, and I get that. Like, if he had already addressed it and apologized and has come out and said like, oh, obviously I have nothing against that, but 10 years ago, it goes back into going back into the time of it. And I don't like that it seems to be people who do a lot of the virtue signaling type behaviors that we've kind of talked about, seem to feel that those should be met with the same amount of punishment.
We will actually get into that with our last con here.
Okay.
But before we dive into that, let's go into our last pro, which is call out culture is simply a new form of boycott, a cherished tactic in the civil rights movement to bring about social change. Rosa Parks led a boycott. That was successful for in terms of integrating public transportation. Also, think of some of the boycotts that are currently out today. I mean, the article in question talked about how Coke, Unilever, and Ford have pulled their advertising from Facebook because they wouldn't censor hate groups on their platforms. So it can work and work for positive change.
Right. And what's funny is it's almost like this con goes against the other pro, you know what I mean? The call this pro goes right against the other con that we had just said that we didn't buy, that it doesn't cause social change and stuff. Yeah. Because yes, it does. It totally does. And that's really awesome. I think it's great when a company, because they did turn around and end up taking it off. Am I understanding that correctly? Or did that have to like go through some crazy court system?
The Coke, Unilever, and Ford ads?
Yeah.
No, they pulled the ads from Facebook.
Yeah. Like they went ahead and pulled them themselves. Like it doesn't like, right. Like the whole point of the call out culture wasn't to like build a mob to make a case. It sounds like in that instance, it was quite successful. People that those businesses were interested in their feedback, got to hear that feedback in a way that they otherwise wouldn't have, and then were able to respond to it. And then it's like, I feel like there's still the other level that would somehow want more. Like, no, it's not good enough just to remove the ads. Now you have to do something else. And that's what I feel like is more of the cancel culture, like, end of it. Like, I don't know. To me, it still almost feels like through this pro and con, there is a big difference between call out culture and what I think of when I think of cancel culture. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. I think of like the pitchfork and they can never work again. They will never heal.
Yeah. And those people are absolute garbage. I mean, because like if that were the case, someone like Robert Downey Jr. would never have had a chance to have his career flourish again, because in the 90s he was very much canceled by his own admission, by his own actions. I mean, he was in prison for a couple of years because of his drug habits and drug problems. Thankfully, he got over it. But I think people need to remember that in a lot of ways, because when somebody is actively being destructive, whether it's to themselves or to other people, their actions should be called out. But if they are changing, there should be some forgiveness depending on what we're talking about here. Like Cosby, fuck him. I don't think there's any level of forgiveness at this point for what he did.
Not that will result in him being able to like be a cherished household name again, right?
Yeah.
Like,
no,
now that all being said, should he still be allowed to have a job like doing something else if he needs that? Because, at this point he's retirement age. So what is he even being kept from at this point? Nothing, I don't think. I think like, to my knowledge, he's not destitute or anything. I think he's just quietly living out his days. You know,
Nope, he's still on tour.
Oh, he's still on tour?
He still does tour. Now, granted, is he going to as many places as he has in the past? No, but he's still making money.
Oh my God, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. There's actually, it's funny, there's an old memory that comes up every now and then of like, this was before it came out. And I had taken a picture of how Bill Cosby was coming to town. I was like, oh my God, I totally want to see him. And I'm like, something I would never say again. But again, that's me, right? Now, if when you watch Bill Cosby, you're more taken back to like those good messages from that show, right? Because there was some good wholesomeness. All power to you. I don't think you're a shitty person. I actually could kind of commend that ability to still take like those positive messages that were written by a totally different writer about a character that he portrayed. Like, if you can do that and still enjoy him, cool. I didn't even know he did comedy. Like, I don't know. I don't even know what he would joke about. See, I don't even know if I would want to see him if that hadn't happened. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I didn't even know that he did comedy. So again, the Reverend displays the social ignorance that I'm a little bit not finger on the pulse of what people do that are famous. If I don't care, I just don't care.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I knew growing up he did comedy. I actually was a fan of his comedy work. I mean, I in terms of a storyteller in comedy, I think him, Lenny Bruce, and George Carlin and Joan Rivers would probably be four people that I would think were responsible for how comedy is today. You know.
Oh yeah, the chocolate
comedy
cake joke. That was from his stand-up, wasn't it? The chocolate cake being breakfast because it's got eggs, it's got flour. Pretty sure that was a Cosby. And that's like a joke that I know I've heard people reference, but you don't talk about that it was Cosby.
Oh, there's one that he did that Carlos Mencia stole about how, you know, fathers will teach their kids how to play football and be there with them at every games. But then when the kid wins the Super Bowl, the first thing he says is, "Thanks, Mom."
I don't know. I guess I wouldn't even know what he would do comedy about. Like, but it goes back to I haven't wanted to follow him in so long that I wouldn't know. Because I enjoyed George Carlin, like up until I think he got really bitter and ranty at the end. But, you know, whenever he got closer to the end of his life, I felt like he got a little bit too bitter and ranty for me. But I still like mostly appreciated his comedy. But I don't know. I don't want to give him money. I can't see him and not think of that. And that's just my thing.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kind of curious what his jokes would be about, but at the same time, I'm not curious what his jokes would be about, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, I
don't think that he would be the type that would ever comment upon this at all, apart from "thank you for supporting me. Now here are my same jokes that I did in the 60s again."
Basically. Yeah. It's definitely not worth enough for me to pay any money or go through any effort to see what he's joking about these days. But, you know, I am, I guess, slightly curious. Part of my brain is.
Indeed. Now, the last con here is call-out culture is a slippery slope and leads to intolerance in democratic societies as people systemically exclude of anyone who disagrees with their views. And there's a quote here from Stephen Mentz, who's a professor emeritus at California Polytechnic State University. Some members of a canceling group join in fear of being canceled themselves. People should be able to speak out or remain silent on the issues without fear of retribution. And I think of two instances. You know, I think of an instance that we've talked about on the show before many times, the Gina Carano situation. And I think of James Gunn, the director of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, as well as the Suicide Squad, been in Hollywood for a long time. A couple years back, conservatives found some tweets he did about 10 years ago that the tweets were bad. They were, by his own admission. He'd also apologized for them many years before that as well. But Disney briefly fired him. Granted, they ended up hiring him back, and he ended up getting another job with Warner Brothers, the Suicide Squad movie. So he actually came out in ahead in the long run. But there have been times to where social media has been weaponized to cancel someone, quote unquote, just because they have views that are different. Because James Gunn online was a avid critic of Trump and Republicans. So why else would conservatives want to silence him? I wonder why.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, right? That they did they did the thing that the conservatives are the ones that are normally anti the cancel culture, but yet they like it when it serves their views, which I
But
think.
isn't that true for most people, though?
Oh, yeah, that's anchoring bias at its core. That's like any of the cognitive biases. And that's why it really is. That's why I liked reading the BritannicaProCon.org stuff. That's why I introduced it to you, is I know you're also one of those people that likes to flex your brain and kind of make sure where you stand. Because I like feeling secure in where I stand on things. And the only way you're going to do that is vetting those opinions and honestly listening to the other side. But it seems like not a lot of people practice that. And then it makes some of these arguments worse. It makes them drag out longer than they need to. And, it makes them just never actually get resolved. Especially like when you support it, when it supports you, but not when it doesn't support you. It's like, no. You got to make up your mind about the core topic, not just support it when you like it. But yeah, I think overall, I'm still going to have that stance that I do not believe people should be canceled for stating an opinion, or even, to a sense, jokes that are made on Twitter and stuff like that. And hear me out on this one, because a lot of times that's where comedians try to vet whether a joke is even good or bad or acceptable, right? Because depending on how your following reacts to it can depend on if it actually ends up in a stand-up special or ends up in your 5-minute. Like, I've got some stand-up friends that aren't huge, but they are big enough that they do some of these things like joke testing, because that is where you can get that feedback of, that's fucked up. And maybe that's not the joke that you do, right? Because I know I've saved stuff, I've hashtagged it like sometimes I'm funny, so I can go back and find them, like back when I was trying to do things to see if it would be okay for stand-up. But that's where it's kind of funny that they say, stand-up comedy is becoming very difficult to do. And it goes back to that sentiment being shared of, you don't know what statement you make today is going to be super offensive tomorrow. And now that we already have the internet that holds on to everything forever. Because even say you delete the tweet, right? You made a joke, enough of your fans went oof or ugh or thumbs down that you delete it. Like, okay, yeah, that joke, I don't know how to sell that where that would be funny. Take it down. All it takes is one person screenshotting that
Ding, ding.
and saving it for later. And meanwhile, like, you didn't mean anything by the tweet. You were testing a joke premise that you realized, oh yeah, like that way didn't land. So it kind of takes away what was this really cool social media way of being able to refine jokes in the line of doing comedy. And being able to have that safe vetting, because there's not a lot of places to do that. You can go to local open mics, especially if they're like being crowded by other comedians. But even then, I think you would still risk being canceled in your community if you step out of line too much, right? So, yeah, like, and the Gina Carino thing was just such a great example, I think. And now, do I personally feel people should be taking opinions to heart from stars just because they're famous, right? No, not necessarily. I don't know. I want to take my political opinions more from somebody who understands politics and like maybe has studied it. And that's why I think it's hilarious that Tucker Carlson, I guess, only has a BA in history. I had seen this meme where I guess right now it's cool to make fun of Bill Nye the Science Guy on the far right. And there's this meme about how there's this boxer that's more of is closer to the credentials of being a scientist than Bill Nye, because Bill Nye has just got like an engineering degree.
No, I know who you're talking. I saw the meme. It was Dolph Lundgren who played.
Who's Dolph Lundgren?
He's an actor.
Oh, okay. I just saw the boxer thing, so I just assumed, because I don't know this person.
That was his character that he played in Rocky IV, Ivan Drago. But in real life, Dolph Lundgren is a certified genius. I mean, he's really, really smart.
Yeah, so I had seen that, and so just a fun random fact that's going to be thrown in here today, I guess. So I saw that, and I was like, so this is just what? Is this the far right just trying to make fun? Like, he's never called himself a scientist. He's called himself the science guy. And so I was curious. I was like, well, if this is the same side that takes all of their political knowledge from Tucker Carlson, What's his degree look like? And I looked it up today, and today I learned that he has a bachelor's in history, that apparently he applied to work like in the intelligence agency, got denied, and went into journalism after his father encouraged him to do so by saying, quote, "They'll take anybody."
Yeah, and they did. Oof.
But anywho, so that being said, like, yeah, I don't listen to Tucker Carlson, so I never vetted like his credentials, but maybe you really should consider where you're taking advice from, right? It's kind of like, it's funny that like maybe don't take what to eat advice from the fast food place, because they kind of have a vested interest in convincing you to eat their thing.
Yeah.
So maybe like, and then obviously Gina is not like somebody who's going to directly, get something out of her beliefs being absorbed by people. Not directly anyway, right? It's not as direct as the fast food thing, but you should totally consider your source. Is it somebody that actually has like really good knowledge and understanding of this, either by having a degree or even just personally being interested in researching it, right? Like, I think you would generally trust me on a lot of dietary stuff because you know me well enough that I've been researching it. Do I have any degree on paper? Fuck no, but that's not going to stop me from sharing like what I learn. So, but should you take my advice over the doctor that you are seeing? God, I hope fucking not, because I have not studied all of the body. But, if you want to take something and let that be absorbed into all of the factors that you take in when you make a decision about a belief, all power to you. But I don't know. I didn't really understand people who take political advice from stars who I really doubt have the energy to be investing that background effort in researching how politics works, right? Like last I checked, being an actor, like especially to these levels, because there's been a lot of them that have spoken out about opinions. But last, from what I understood, that's a pretty busy life. I doubt you're absorbing, novels explaining and books like explaining how our politics work. I've got more time than you, and I don't do that. So I kind of tiptoe into it every now and then, but it goes through vetted sources and things like that. But anywho, canceling people for sharing an opinion is just kind of not my favorite concept in the world, right? And I don't think we should be punishing people for sharing their opinion when really your problem is that other people are absorbing it like fact.
Yeah. I mean, it's because the Gina was a tough one. I mean, it's like at the end of the day, she was guilty of was just posting stuff on social media. Now, if I was like her manager, I would have told her to just delete your social media and never be on it again, because what's the fucking point, for anybody at this point, really? Because think about it too. Like, think about how many people that have been quote unquote canceled, that have had people that have meticulously gone back and looked over every single tweet this person has done. It's happened multiple times. And again, taking stuff out of context, like one thing I've mentioned on the show before, how on Facebook I've gone back and deleted all the times I've quoted Family Guy without indicating that I was quoting Family Guy, because people saw like one line from Quagmire was, I like to talk to ladies and ask them about their dad, and if they say anything nice about their dad, I move on to the next one. Which again, even with attributing the fact that it came from Family Guy, it could be viewed as problematic somewhat, I guess. But without that quote, a complete stranger, a potential job, and a potential employer could see that and think, maybe he thinks this. Maybe I don't want that type of behavior in my place of work. And that's, I think, something people have to think about overall in terms of social media. It's why I've become a lot more hesitant about posting anything of any real substance on there, apart from promoting our wonderful show.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we know that I use social media as a voice of you're not alone, right? There's life after trauma. We can go through things. We can self-heal even if you don't have access. Like, there are some things you can do, but I think that's the most controversial I get anymore. I wasn't always that way. because I'm not going to try to convince you guys that I've always been the perfect specimen of balanced humanity that you have before you today, the Reverend. And I'm still not, because I'm still working on it. And but yeah, like there were times that I'm sure you can go back and find some really shitty jokes. Y'all, I was raised in Texas. There were certain words that I didn't know were racist until I accidentally said them. Okay? That does exist. Now, granted, the look on everybody's face made it abundantly clear, and I knew immediately I had made an error. However,
but you learn from that, and I think
Right.
what the pitchfork people are not doing is allowing people to learn, and that takes time. It's like they want to immediately sever them from society for the smallest of crimes. Again, not talking to Bill Cosby here. We're talking about like a Gina Carano, because Gina did nothing that was against the law. She just lacked some common sense.
No, but I guarantee she got death threats, and that is against the law. And that goes right back up to where there is a point about that level of cancel culture where you're like kind of like making it worse. But I think at some point, like the reason why people respond is it goes back to getting likes and getting responses on social media literally messes with brain chemistry. So I think once it started, it's literally fighting your animal brain at that point. And if you're not able to grasp onto any logic and you're still feeling like you need to be on the defense and that you need to fight this predator because it's the same shit, just because it's on social media doesn't mean that your brain is not doing the animal thing and reacting to it like a threat, like a predator. So I can totally, on the psychology end, understand why, right? Because when you're the logic human watching this play out on social media, it's like, oh my God, just delete your fucking Twitter. Oh my God, just. There's that just statement, right? Like I've almost been triggered by that word now, like in a good way triggered, right? Because that can also mean two different things. But now, like when I hear just statements, I'm like, that's probably coming from a place of privilege. Because when you're in your logic brain and somebody else is in emotion brain, you're in a better state to unpack something logically than they will be until they can come out of emotion brain, right?
Yeah.
Like just talking about how our brains work. Sorry guys, we are animals. We are such animals. And yeah, it's like it's like, oh my God, you need to, oh no, you're still going, and oh God, you need to like when I see this stuff play out and like Gina, and then she just kept throwing gasoline on the fucking fire with like, wasn't there like pictures that she started sharing and like just totally made it worse? Like I don't know. Like there was some jokes that she had shared alongside of it too. I had thought that were not very good. And
she was posting stuff. Right? Yeah, she was posting stuff that was supporting Trump, supporting the anti-mask movement, questioning vaccines. So it's one of those. Which again, with that type of stuff, being that it was early on in the pandemic and she had enough of a platform, there is a question of someone should be called out for, spreading misinformation if they do have a pretty big platform. So I have no problem with something like that, I guess. But again, social media. She didn't rob a liquor store. She didn't kick a baby. It was posting a meme.
Yeah.
And like I'm as far as a business goes, I'm not going to blame Walt Disney for letting her go. I mean, if I owned a business and I had an employee that was constantly doing that, and I gave them chance after chance to just stop putting gas on the fire, and they kept doing it, I would probably err on the side of saying maybe I don't need you with my company. But like I said, when she did get fired, my hope deep down is that someday she does some self-reflection and realizes that she didn't help herself.
Oh, yeah. And not even necessarily saying that she needs to come around and, be pro-vaccine and pro all the things or anything like that. Just realizing that it didn't need to be continually escalated and poked back at, right? That you can come down off of that and, you can, that situation was probably the most perfect example of the ones that I find extremely frustrating with when it is cancel culture. And I think Gina definitely falls under it. Granted, yeah, her boss told her to quit and she made a fucking choice. And so honestly, I supported them choosing to fire her. They asked her to please stop, and she continued. Therefore, she made a choice knowing her job was on the line at that point. What I don't like is like people getting fired when that was never anything discussed. I mean, to me, it would almost. Oh, go ahead. You got a finger up. I'm going to let you go because my side is not going to make sense anyway. So go for it.
Well, there was the 15 Minutes of Shame. They talked about a Hispanic gentleman that was fired from his job. It was at the start of the Black Lives Matters protest. And what happened is somebody at the protest saw this guy who worked for the San Diego power company or something like that. Somebody saw him doing this in his vehicle, just had his hand outside the vehicle, just holding his hand like that, which is, for me, I always thought was, hey, good for you. But apparently doing the fingers like this is now like a white power type of hand signal, which I have confirmed is an actual thing. But what happened in this particular,
looking that up now. Okay.
Yeah, what happened?
And what Tim's doing, by the way, because he's showing me, it almost looks like the OK symbol for those that don't know what we're talking about. Because okay, yes, things are good.
Indeed.
And it's like hung upside down though, right? Isn't it intentionally?
I think they did that, but the guy in question had his hand outside the vehicle and his hand was down. So I've seen pictures where people, hold it up like, okay. But the fact of the matter was, what ultimately happened is that the guy that was in the Black Lives Matter crowd who took this picture, posted it online, and got this guy fired, ended up admitting that, hey, I didn't realize a lot of situations. He just saw this guy doing the hand signal. He didn't know that if this guy was doing something intentionally. And again, the okay hand signal, for most of my life, it was just okay. I mean, I've never used that hand signal much, but it was just okay. I mean, I've done it before. And once I knew it was co-opted by white supremacists, I've stopped using it in that particular case. But like a situation to where a random stranger takes a picture of another random stranger, has that random stranger's life ruined, just to find out in the end it was miscommunication. Wrong. That is wrong.
Yes, and those are definitely those situations that obviously I don't support. So
yeah, because
it's a fine line, right? Because I do support speaking your story and call out culture to a point, but I don't necessarily support some of the weird repercussions that happen, right? Because our social court isn't always correct. Look at the guy with the Boston Marathon bombing. He basically was socially guilty his entire life. And I bring him up as an example. I think anytime we start talking about, he got cancel cultured before cancel culture. Technically, he got fired from his job. He wasn't ever really able to work in security or anything again. And everybody hated him. And all he did was try to save a bunch of people's lives. And he did save lives because he cleared the area. The guy that found the backpack that turned out later to
not the Boston Marathon. That was the Atlanta 96 Summer Olympics.
Oh,
Richard Jewell.
Richard Jewell. Okay, that name's familiar. That guy. See, guys, sometimes my memory is kind of shit with events. But yeah, I did get that. He found the bag. He notified. For whatever reason, they decided he was the suspect. And because it had kind of been put out there to the public, everybody decided he was guilty. He was never charged of anything. So that's somebody that technically I would say falls under cancel culture too. And that never did. The mother did a defamation case she saw it through because he had passed away from I think he had a heart attack or heart disease or something. He was a bigger dude. Like he didn't look like he was like the epitome of health, but that's also after years of suddenly not being able to do the career that was like what he wanted to do was security, be an officer type thing. Like that's got to be especially gutting, especially when you did something to save lives and it got turned in such a way because that's how it got read by public opinion, was that you wanted to try to look like some kind of hero or something, which totally turned out to not even be close to true. But so it's definitely got its ends of it. And that's where it's like, I just want to encourage people to be careful because we are the element of it, right? We are that social piece that businesses are watching to see if they need to fire somebody for this. We are that social piece that's taking the picture of somebody with a hand signal, no context, and then it ends up in somebody being fired. That is us.
Yeah, I think the ultimate lesson here, with the pros and cons for me to relay to our audience, is just be a little more discerning. Don't grab the pitchfork just yet. Sometimes grabbing a pitchfork is very much appropriate, but you have to judge each and every situation for what it is and let it play out before you start, planting your flag on a particular side. Because I think the big thing that I see missing in a lot of conversations today is the idea of nuance. Because life is not black and white. People are not all evil or all good. There could be reasons why actions are taken by somebody that you may still not agree with, but doesn't necessarily make them bad or anything like that. Just take the time to research the situation and don't join in on it. Don't reach. Just be a little more discerning. Think about it. How would you want people react if you were in the other person's shoes?
Exactly. I mean, hopefully you're not in the shoes of some of the things that these people have done. But yeah, I mean, especially if it's, like the example of a joke from 10 years back, or if it is like the example of trying to test a joke that's kind of on that edge of, is it going to be funny or is it just going to offend, trying to learn your audience, and then whoops, it's going to offend. Like, you're allowed to make decisions too without feeling the need to force it on everybody or escalate it. Like, you can make decisions to not financially support everybody. Like, I kind of understand some bringing it up, right? Because it does open the conversation. Like, you could totally say, like, hey, I don't want to watch this because of this. But then whenever you start going out there and demanding anybody who likes you or wants to be in your circle better not watch or have anything to do with this person, maybe question that level, right? Like, maybe that's not necessarily the healthiest to have. Tweet your tweets. By all means, obviously it is effective. Look at the ads that got pulled. You should be speaking your voice. But to me, I think that cancel culture end of it is the demands. When you start making demands, or when you start escalating it beyond what the original crime was, like death threats. Because that's all, like, my goodness, if you're escalating to death threats over somebody making a really off-color joke, those are not equal things. And maybe you should, but maybe you can take that and be triggered by the fact that you reacted in such a way and use that as, maybe I should reflect on how I react when people say things I don't agree with, because that seems like a very a far jump, right? To say, like, you deserve death for sharing this.
Yeah,
that's a level that maybe could warrant some self-reflection, I guess, is all I'm putting out there. Like, I guess I don't really have a strong opinion on cancel. I have a strong and non-strong opinion, right? Like, I don't necessarily think I'm right, but it's something that I do think we should talk about because it does affect quite a lot of stuff. But I do definitely agree that with social media, it does give our voice power as being smaller people, and that there is a huge difference between somebody sharing that they have learned knowledge about something and spreading it to their circle, right? Because that's how us normie folks, us non-celebs use it, is just to share with our circle. Like, that's fine, but maybe once it starts getting to a pitchfork level, check yourself a little before you're getting there. Like, what are you pitchforking and torching for exactly?
Yeah, I mean, because the number of videos I saw on TikTok, the number of pictures I saw on Instagram about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard situation, you would think people were supporting a sports team or whatever, and I don't get that. I mean, I'm not going to knock anybody for being interested in this topic. I mean, people can walk and chew gum at the same time. So you can be interested in topics that, in the grand scheme of things, don't matter much. I mean, gosh, I love professional wrestling, so I'm not going to judge anybody. But in the grand scheme of things, does Johnny Depp winning this trial affect me in any way, shape, or form? No. Does Amber Heard doing her thing affect me in any way, shape, or form? No. I think the big thing that I saw, the only big thing that I saw, I talked about at the top of the show that was concerning, was the fact that I felt it was bad form for a trial that talked about domestic abuse to be broadcast on national television. I don't think that was good for potential other victims, but that's just my opinion. But still, what happens to them does not affect me. So why should I get any sort of emotional investment into this? Why? I shouldn't. It's silly.
Yeah, and I don't know. Maybe it's just because being somebody who is kind of a hashtag Me Tooer and somebody who definitely wants a culture where we encourage people to speak out, I really would hope that this doesn't affect that, because this goes back into, this is a big public stage, right? It is super unlikely that the majority of people and the demographic of people who are in abusive situations, crazy unlikely that there will be any defamation case brought up against you for speaking your truth and speaking your story, right? But yeah, it is kind of disturbing, kind of how much, for this being a defamation case, how much abuse was talked about, which I don't know. It's hard, right? Because we already did have him being canceled over what was the stuff that leaked out of abuse allegations, right? Mm-hmm. So we already did have that. This case didn't actually do anything different than, I guess, the first case did. It just allowed it to seep out for both people. Because it seemed like, because of the focus of the first case, it was just all of the stuff that was, oh, Johnny did this and Johnny did that. And I don't remember ever hearing any of Amber Heard's contribution to what, again, sounds like a crazy toxic relationship being brought up until the defamation case. And that was a lot to do because of the stories that she wrote about after already winning it. So it does kind of call out, like, what was the point of that? You had already testified, you had already won. Why do this? And it goes back to some of that being, but the argument being that it seems for personal gain, right? That it sold, it made her money, because there are people who write about their abuse experiences all the time. And a lot of the main driver for that is to raise awareness. And that's really easy, right? Like, I'm working on a book about some of the stuff that I've went through. So, I mean, I don't feel scared to do that at all. Granted, I don't intend on saying names, and I might even try to release the book under a pseudonym for myself, because I just don't necessarily want the death threats that sometimes can happen if the wrong person decides you must be lying. Right. I don't want to deal with that. I've dealt with enough of anxiety symptoms from what happened before in my life. I don't need to cause more. But that being said, if this gets out to anybody who's worried about that, I really don't think you have to worry about this type of repercussion. This seems like a very interesting situation, because it goes back into, what is the proven intention behind what you're doing, right? Now, I'm writing a book, and hey, we can have it on record today in case it ever comes up, is that a lot of things can happen in our culture. And we should be raising awareness of how common it is so that we can address it as a culture and have less abused people. And that is a very good reason for writing that. Like a book like that. And that's why abuse survivors write their book. It's not necessarily to try to make money off of their abuse. Granted, that is kind of cool, but really you're making money out of spending the time that is writing. Like, oh my God, to me, that's so like undercuts the hard ass work that is writing by saying you only want money, like you're trying to make money off your experience. Like, no, I'm trying to make money off the fact that I wrote a book and I produced something. Like, it's totally different. And so it just goes into, but what was kind of the purpose of the content? And it does seem like that this wasn't done with the intention of making people feel empowered enough to share their story. So really, as long as you're not planning on writing a book or anything, I would say you're definitely in the clear to move forward, to speak your story, to do what you need to do in the legal system, if that's something you're going to do, without worrying about this type of repercussion, right? Well, I mean, it seems quite logical to me to put together that this is not going to apply to, I would be bold enough to say, like in the high 90% of people who would turn in an abuse, because most people don't go and write stories or, aren't costing millions of dollars in their careers, right?
I get that, and I agree in theory. It's just what I'm thinking of is, how scary it must be for a woman who is in an abusive situation, and how speaking out is not always the safe thing. And it's more than anything, it's more just like a moral defeat. That's how I kind of view this, because it's like it could make that woman who's sitting in a house, a trailer, an apartment in an abusive situation think, if Amber Heard has to deal with all this shit, imagine what they would do to me, and like that type of behavior, like you can't prevent that from happening. I guess all you can do is just make sure that, if you're in our position, you keep fighting and voting in people into office that are going to make life better for those people that are in those situations,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, really, the most power we have is social media and voting.
Yep. And we need to use them responsibly. If someone is a complete asshole, then I got no problem with life, hitting them in the head and telling them to calm down. But we do have to be discerning, and you don't have to fight every battle. If you do want to fight a battle, just be a little more discerning about it and understand that there is nuance here, because again, too, look at our media. Our media isn't always right about everything. And there are times to where they will write an article that is jaded, coming from specifically one side because they have an agenda they want to put out. It happens. So you have to be discerning, and you have to be able to, depending on the case, not everybody, but depending on the case, you have to be able to have some room for forgiveness at the end of the day.
Exactly.
All right. So with that, I think we've rambled enough for another week here, unless you have anything else you want to say about cancel culture.
I really don't. It's something that I know we touch on from time to time. I think it's cool that we wound up actually just kind of having a dedicated episode about it. It's something that, I think it's pretty clear that I'm kind of conflicted on the topic in general, right? Like, I don't think it's as clear cut and easy as nobody should ever express a fucking opinion on social media again. That doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, it does seem like there are times that it gets carried away. And that's the thing that I think it's important that we have conversations like this, because it's going to help refine, like, at what point are we getting taken away or carried away by it, right? Like, definitely death threats, right? We can all agree matching a non-violent offense with the threat of violence and wanting to end their life is super not cool. I would like to continue that message. Like, we can agree that maybe that's too far, but it seems like there's some levels beneath that. Look at Jewel, pre-cancel culture person. There was actually, if you watch the mystery at the Cecil Hotel that talks about the disappearance of that girl, Elisa Lam, I think was her name.
Mm-hmm.
There was somebody that social media decided he must have done this. He was there like a year or two before the girl was ever there. But he got death threats and all of this stuff to the point that I'm pretty sure he had admitted, like, in the documentary, that he tried to end his own life. He had nothing to do with it. So, like, right there is a point where this is really damaging and not doing help. But there's also a lot of really good stuff. Like, there is so much power behind speaking your voice. So I'm not going to tell people to not share your opinions of people. Right? Because you should. That is totally, you are allowed to share opinions, but I will stand up for you too, even if it's opinion that I don't agree with, that you shouldn't lose your job for sharing an opinion. I just don't really think so.
Well, that's up to the business, though, at the end of the day. And I don't think most, when it comes to the people that are losing their jobs, it's for a social media post or something like that. It is, you find out it ends up being something like a Gina Carano situation, to where somebody was saying, okay, calm down, don't do this again. Or it's just something that came out of nowhere that was, it's just, again, but that's nuance. That's, that's something people don't take the time to do. But, hopefully we've told you all at home something interesting that you all take to heart.
Yes, that's all we try to impart with this, our humble little show.
Indeed, indeed. So I think we will wrap it up. We thank you all for listening to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. Remember to check out the other shows on the Friends Talking Nerdy podcast network. Every Saturday in this podcast space, we will have something to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Time to get my hair to pop for Pride Month.
Oh, yeah.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.